Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. At the plate, he would stretch and coil like a large cat, and lightning bolts would sizzle off his bat. In the field, he ran down the uncatchable and unfurled throws of pristine poetry. And yet, Roberto Clemente, despite a dozen gold gloves and 4 batting titles, wasn't fully appreciated. As we'll see over the next half hour, the Pittsburgh Pirates' right fielder played in the time of Mantle, Mays, and Aaron. And though his career belonged in the same ballpark, he was the one in the shadows.
I had got the job to work in Pittsburgh in May of '66, and Jimmy Cannon was one of the fellows that recommended me for the job in Pittsburgh. He says to me, you know, you're going to a town that might have the best player in baseball and nobody knows.
Mays and Aaron and Mantle were hitting the home runs, so they captivated the media, and it kind of overshadowed Roberto a lot.
He was a tremendous ball player. The reason I think he might have not got the recognition because he was in Pittsburgh.
If you don't play in New York City, you know, one of those large cities, they didn't even think you was a baseball player.
He wanted recognition and appreciation, and it came too slowly for him.
As part of the first large Latino wave to play in the majors, Puerto Rican Roberto Clemente faced a language and cultural barrier that played out on the Pittsburgh sports pages of 1955 in derision, ignorance, and bad taste.
He'd use a phrase, say like, I hit the ball, and they would print H-E-E-T instead of H-I-T.
They quoted him as though he were Tarzan. Meet Tarzan, you Jane.
He felt it was a form of mockery, or he was being made to look like some kind of exotic character, and he didn't feel like one. He just felt like a man who deserved a certain amount of respect.
I have a feeling those old-time beat writers cleaned up the quotes of a lot of the good old Southern boys who didn't exactly speak in the King's English.
Say he would hit a home run and win a game. They would either quote him with a funny accent, or they would ignore him and go over to the guy who pitched the game and quote him.
A brilliant outfielder with a rifle arm, Clemente was often dismissed as a hot dog. And when he missed a game, he was called either lazy or a hypochondriac. What also stung deep were the constant lampoons of his broken English.
He would say things like, my bad shoulder feels good, but my good shoulder feels bad, or I feel better when I am sick. And the sports writers would write this as comedy, and he was deadly serious, and he resented that.
He was accused of malingering, that he imagined a lot of illnesses. He thought he wasn't treated fairly, and he felt that that was true of most of the Latinos.
So every time we complain, they say we're faking. Hurt my knees playing ball, but I was afraid to complain because they said we complain too much.
There was one thing that he would mutter in the clubhouse about this would be sports writer. He just didn't trust him.
That distrust grew roots in 1960, a World Championship season in Pittsburgh. Shortstop Dick Groat, the National League batting leader at .325, was voted MVP. Clemente hit .314, but his 94 RBIs were nearly double those of his teammate.
This Clemente told me. He said, I never complained about Groat winning. I complained about being voted 8th.
When he says, I did not deserve to finish 8th, and he spoke his mind, that was perhaps the first time he came out really in the open. I don't deserve this.
Despite others' devaluation of him, Clemente knew who he was and what he was worth. Viewed through the double lens of sports, he was at once seen as dignified and cocky.
When he says, for me, I'm the best in the world, you have to understand that Latins are sensitive and proud people. And if you ask a plumber or an engineer, are you any good? They'll say, for me, I am the best plumber on the island, or for me, I am the best engineer on the island. It's an assertion of self-respect and confidence in your ability.
A lot of people who did not know Roberto, the human being, like I did, would understand that his pride translated instantly into arrogance. He was not an arrogant guy.
He knew what he could do,
He was sure no one was better than he was. And he was out there to prove it.
The opportunity came in the 1971 World Series. Before playing the Orioles, Clemente set the stage by declaring to the national press, "Nobody does anything better than me in baseball."
All the skeptics that thought that Hank Aaron or Willie Mays was much better than Clemente, I'm going to show even those guys that I am as good as they are, or better.
That is hit well. A Clemente home run, and the Pirates lead 1-0.
Nobody hit 400 off our pitching staff. Maybe off of one pitcher. You know, a guy might have one guy's number, but not our whole staff.
Bobby Clemente continues to totally annihilate Baltimore pitching.
He carried us on his back. We showed up to the World Series that year, and we took our positions. That's all we did. Just showed up.
Long chase for Clemente. Gallops over. Grabs it, whirls. Here's Rutman coming to throw. What a throw! He just beat it in.
Clemente carried the Pirates to victory with at least one hit in each contest, extending his World Series streak to 14. With a .414 batting average and a crucial home run in Game 7, he was named MVP.
People took a different look at Roberto Clemente. I think people really thought that this is one of the all-time great ball players, if they didn't think that before.
I remember he said, "I now have peace of mind." That was his moment of fulfillment.
I think Roberto did mature as he went along. Also, I think the American public became more comfortable with him. But it took a long time for America to appreciate him.
I would like to say something for my mother and father in Spanish. En el día más grande de mi vida, para los nenes, la bendición mía, y que me...
Who had the audacity on national English TV to take a little break at the top of the question and say, "Excuse me, but I really need to send the message back home"? That tells you how important his background was for him.
That background began for Roberto Clemente Walker on August 18, 1934, in Carolina, Puerto Rico. The youngest of 7, Roberto learned early the value of work. He often accompanied his father to his foreman's job at the local sugar mill.
When he was about 8 or 9, he wanted a bicycle and apparently carried heavy containers of milk for a neighbor every morning and every evening, and got a penny in the morning and a penny, and saved $20-some to buy a bicycle.
Roberto identified a lot with the strugglers. He used to tell me taxi drivers, people who work in the factories, guys who pick up the garbage. He respected those people. He told me more than once, the people who struggle are the people who know the true essence of what to be alive is.
Nowhere was Clemente more alive than on the baseball field. He caught the eye of Brooklyn scout Al Campanis, who signed the 19-year-old for $10,000 in February of 1954. Sent to the Dodgers' AAA farm club in Montreal, Clemente was the best-kept secret in baseball.
Whenever we saw scouts come into the ballpark, we didn't play him. He was on deck. And I saw about 5 or 6 scouts, and I hollered to the manager, and I pointed. He took Clemente out for a pinch hitter in the bottom of the first inning. And that young man was really upset.
We used to sit there and he'd say, "Joey, what's wrong with the Dodgers? They don't let me play."
Despite the Dodgers' efforts to hide his talent, Clemente was picked first by the cellar-dwelling Pirates in the December 1954 draft of minor leaguers. Although it took just 6 years for Pittsburgh to win the World Series with Clemente, it took longer for him to be welcomed by his teammates.
He didn't go out of his way to come to us, and we didn't go out of our way to go to him. So both ends just, it didn't gel.
Bobby was on the bus, and we joked and had fun around the batting cage and so forth, but it wasn't like he went out to dinner with us after the games. Bobby kind of lived in his own world.
Some of the guys don't even know where Puerto Rico was. They probably thought Puerto Rico was a jungle.
He never let anybody call him Bob. He said Roberto. He corrected everybody that said to him, "Hey, Bob." He said Roberto.
Keenly aware of the prevailing social order of mid-century America, Clemente often remarked that as a black Latino, he had 2 strikes against him. Yet over the years, he publicly decried that Latinos, like blacks, were virtually shut out from lucrative Madison Avenue endorsements and the managerial ranks of the major leagues.
This was the whole period of the civil rights movement. Some of the athletes, they focused on the ball game, but Clemente was a very complex figure who was aware of his importance. He was an athlete, but at the same time, he was a spokesman for the Latin community.
He had a relationship with Martin Luther King. They met in Puerto Rico once in the mid-60s, and they spoke about what could be done to better race relations in the States.
I am very outspoken. I when I feel something that not only about me, or I feel something that is injustice toward my teammate or somebody else, I want to say something about it.
Clemente was a very militant, a very vocal defender of the Latin American player, and I got him some enemies, and I got him some criticism.
The impact that he had in the Caribbean society, of the Hispanic society, was this uplifting belief that yes, we can achieve greatness in this sport.
In the Latin coaches, he's number 1. One of the reasons why today we've been well known is because he was fighting for us.
To hear Felipe Alou say he's our Jackie Robinson, to see Sammy Sosa wear 21, play right field, he's our man.
Since I met him, he was always talking about death. He was always insisting that he was going to die young, always. I said, well, don't talk about sad things, you know. And I said, no, you will see. I know I will die young.
On September 30th, 1972, Clemente became the 11th player in history to reach 3,000 hits.
Bobby hits the drive into the gap in the left center field. There's the end.
When he took that pose, I have that image of him standing there. It wasn't jumping up and down, it wasn't jubilation, it was a quiet gesture of, yes, I've done this, and I acknowledge all of you, and here I am.
Clemente's landmark hit came in his last regular season at bat. Almost 3 months later, he was at home in San Juan when a major earthquake struck Managua, Nicaragua.
There were reports that the collected relief supplies from Puerto Rico were being sold to the survivors of the earthquake in Managua by members of the Nicaraguan National Guard. He told Vera that if they were selling those supplies and he went there, he would stop it. They wouldn't do that with Roberto Clemente there.
On New Year's Eve, Clemente boarded a relief plane bound for Managua. A makeshift crew was in command of the DC-7, which itself had mechanical problems and was overloaded with emergency supplies.
His son begged him not to go. He had a premonition that something was going to happen. His wife, Vera, didn't want him to go. But he went because he cared.
After we said goodbye, he stayed on the door. I would stay standing there. And he had a very sad look, very deep and very sad look. I can never forget that look.
Pittsburgh Pirates outfielder Roberto Clemente headed up relief efforts in his native Puerto Rico for victims of the Nicaraguan earthquake. Late last night, he was killed when a cargo plane that he was aboard crashed shortly after takeoff from San Juan.
I was in Milwaukee at the time. I was listening to the 5 o'clock news and heard that his plane had gone down. It was probably one of the saddest days of my life.
It was the loss of a national hero. The only thing I can think of that in my own lifetime like it is when President Kennedy was killed. It was that kind of a thing. It sort of sent a wave of sadness throughout the whole country.
A 3-day period of mourning was declared in Puerto Rico. The Pirates chartered a plane to attend a memorial service in their fallen hero's hometown of Carolina. Despite an outpouring of grief, the loss of Roberto Clemente at 38 was too much for some to accept.
Manny Sanguillen, the catcher for the Pirates, refused to believe that Roberto was dead and would go out into the ocean and literally look for the plane and look for Roberto floating.
I wanted to look for my friend. That was in my mind, that he was down there. And I want to see him.
I think part of the mystique of Roberto Clemente is the fact that they never found his body. There was no sense of closure.
It's not just a death, it's a hero's death. A lot of athletes do wonderful things, but they don't die doing them.
Everybody knew Clemente, the ball player. But the way he died was for people to know the man. He had to die like that for all the world to know what kind of a man he was.
There's something about early death, especially if it's under heroic circumstances. There's tragedy along with all the glory. So I think that Clemente is, in an odd way, elevated by the circumstances of his death.
3 months following his death, Roberto Clemente was voted into the Hall of Fame by a special ballot, 5 years before he would have been eligible. He was the first Latino to be inducted into Cooperstown.
You always miss him. That's never going to change. Never going to change. Each day you try to live up to his name, but it's reality. He's not here.
It'd be difficult for an American to measure the importance of Clemente's name in Latin America. He has been deified. He's a larger-than-life saint.
I think Clemente really is one of the greatest who ever lived. He didn't have Ted Williams' batting eye, didn't have Joe DiMaggio's grace, he didn't have Lou Brock's speed. He just had enough of everything. And he had a heart that was bigger than River Stadium.
He was omitted from the All-Century team. He said Sports Illustrated told him that after his 3,000th hit, he would be on the cover of the magazine. Instead, he was bumped by Joe Namath. And even in his own town, his 3,000th was pushed from the lead story of the sports section by a Pitt football defeat. Whether it was difference in language or culture, small market, or simple ignorance, just do always seemed to elude Roberto Clemente. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.
I wrote this article about him for Sports Illustrated. The illustrator drew a full-page illustration of Clemente's body and labeled every place in his anatomy that he had ever reported an injury. So Clemente didn't speak to me for a year.
Clemente's injuries were always invisible. He never had any bruises or gashes.
You look at his body, my God, nothing could happen to that body. It was like a brand new car that was never driven. You know, it was perfect.
Not quite. An auto accident in 1954 left Clemente with chronic back problems that required frequent visits to a chiropractor. He also suffered from an array of ailments, from bone chips to malaria to insomnia.
Roberto had the feeling when you asked him, "Hello, Roberto, how are you?" He thought you wanted to know how he was. So he told you.
Oh, my back. Oh, my neck. Oh, my knees. Oh, my thighs. Whatever. You know, he was always complaining.
They used to ask me how you feel today. I said, well, I'm sore. And the next day they come and say, how you feel? I say, I'm sore.
He had a label that he was a hypochondriac. Players used to say to him, "Oh, you're okay." And he didn't like that.
In 1962 is the only time Bobby and I ever had words. Was over his not playing the second game of a doubleheader. When he said, "I no play, I tired." I said, "Bobby, Skinner's tired, Verdon's tired, Hoke's tired, Maz is tired, I'm tired. We need you to play." And he refused.
They would take a day or two off if he went 0 for 4 or he didn't feel strong or he didn't feel just right.
It's like an artist. When he painted a picture, he was on a baseball field and his body was his brush. And he wasn't going to put a piece of crap on the wall and sign his name to Roberto Clemente.
When he was done, the big picture that he signed was a study in brilliant play. Although Clemente only hit 240 homers, his .317 lifetime batting average was higher than that of Mays, Mantle, or Aaron. And for a generation, the 1966 MVP showed the world how to play right field.
I don't think you could have a stronger, more accurate arm from right field. You had to be very, very careful with your turn at first base, because if Clemente would come up throwing, you didn't know whether he was going to throw behind you or in front of you.
I remember in one game, Willie Mays hitting a single to right field and rounding first, and bang, Roberto threw the ball behind him.
You don't want to get melodramatic and say there's an aura, but when he played, I didn't want to miss a play.
He hit the wall head first, caught the ball, tumbled down, held on to it. I said, Roberto, I've seen you play a lot of games. It's the best catch I've ever seen you make. And he said proudly, if the ball is in the park and the game is on the line, I will catch the ball.
Clemente in the outfield was an epic poem written from the fires of the heart about struggle, sacrifice, and honesty.
They had a patio out in the back of their house in Carolina. In the course of explaining this play to this friend of his, he slides across this stone patio in a pair of expensive dress slacks. He brought that kind of passion to almost everything in his life. When he ordered a cup of coffee in the morning, it was intense.
If I was doing something wrong, all he needed to do was look at me. He just, boom, looked at me. I would stop whatever I was doing. I would even stop breathing.
You saw Roberto, you saw a serious individual. Even though he may have been happy inside for X reason, he did not project joy. And if you didn't know him well, that's the impression you got. He's a rough guy.
Beneath that stony visage was a plan in progress. In the 18 seasons that he ruled the right field corner, he remade the neighborhood. By the early 1970s, almost half the Pirates were either black like him or spoke his native language. Only then did he relax.
He could talk for half hour, 45 minutes, and keep you laughing for 45 minutes. And he never did that stuff early in the 50s.
Dave Justy started openly needling Clemente in the clubhouse. And eyes would go up. He'd say, Roberto, are you going to honor us and play today? Well, Clemente loved this. He loved this needle, this little camaraderie with Justy.